Hello and welcome to Hillstrong OT Cyber Chats, our podcast dedicated to exploring the dynamic world of operational technology cybersecurity. Let's dive into the latest challenges, innovations, and strategies to protect our critical infrastructures. We hope you enjoy.
And welcome. I'm Roger Hill. I'm the CEO of Hillstrong Group Security. Really glad everyone can join us today for this podcast. This is going to be a fun one. I've known Greg Greg, it's been a long time.
It's been a very long time.
So would you want to take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, Greg?
Sure. I'm Greg Hale. I'm the editor and founder of Industrial Safety and Security Source, or ISSsource.com, and also the founder of a incident database called ICS Strive. And we report on all incidents that we can find that are publicly reported in the industry. And we do a threat report on that once a year. And so that's the brief version of what we're doing. ISS Source has been around now for, we just celebrated our 15th year. So we've been around for a little while. Yeah, I know. It's been a quick 15 years.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? You know, Greg, I think you and I met post Stuxnet when I was at Siemens building out the security business there. And I know we've had a number of very interesting conversations throughout the years. And maybe, today just talking through a little bit of reminiscence, if you will, but also maybe the state of the economy. I think when you get a couple of old veterans together and offer some different insights, I think it's kind of interesting. We were just talking offline about just kind of the state of OT security as right now, and maybe a good way to kick this off is, why don't you walk us through a little bit of the Strive, in case people aren't familiar with that. And let's start there, Greg.
Yeah. All right. Well, we do a report. Like I said, we do a report every year, and I write stories on ISS Source about incidents. So it seemed like a natural to create a database on those incidents because, quite honestly, there was nothing really around that had that kind of focus. There was a while ago, but that just kind of went away. So we decided to create this website. And last year, obviously we started off with a few incidents, but now we've got well over 1,000. I can't remember the last number. I haven't looked in the past couple of days. But last year we reported on how many incidents. I just have it written down here someplace. We reported on 425 incidents for our database. And of those, 76 incidents caused physical consequences. But so for every consequence, whether it was one plant or two, if it was an incident, it counted, it counted as one. But we had physical consequences at over 1,000 sites in 2024. So 76 incidents that caused physical consequences at over 1,000 sites.
So
I find that pretty interesting.
Yeah. So listen, I think one thing that would be really interesting is maybe to level set on the definition of the incident in order for it to be captured within the Strive.
Well, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's an attack that comes into an organization that causes some kind of physical consequence at a manufacturing site. It could be, a ransomware attack that, causes a shutdown. It's some kind of shutdown that occurs. I mean, that's, to me, one of the, it's pretty basic along those lines.
So does it have to be malicious in nature in order to be classified as an incident, or?
It could be either or. I mean, if it's somebody where they throw a wrench in there and it shuts down the plant for a week or something like that, or that kind of thing. But in most cases, it is some kind of a malicious attack. But it can be accidental and that kind of thing. But if it causes a physical consequence, it's something that happens. And we've been doing this for 4 years, and every year, while the numbers may not seem huge, and it's something whenever I give a talk on this, and we partner on this with Waterfall Security, with Andrew Ginter and I, we work on this together. And every year we're asked, do we think this is the right number or what? And Andrew and I often kind of disagree on this, but to me, the ratio is about the same. But I think you can add like a 0 or 2 to the actual physical consequences. So if we had 76 last year, maybe you could put a 0 at the end of that, or maybe 2 zeros at the end of that. But it's the same thing for the level of incidents. And Roger, from going through the industry, how many incidents are out there that actually don't get reported.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest challenges, right? And another area that I've really been focusing on for probably the last year or so, Greg, is this indirect, really on the IT side. For example, when we talk about ransomware for OT, I think there's very few examples of ransomware actually going south of that industrial DMZ and getting to the process control network or even control system network. I think the most common thing that we see is on the IT side, where it has an indirect impact. In other words, a business decision is to shut down and stop production to either avoid spreading. So it's a containment strategy, or they're forced to do so from a business perspective. For example, whether it's a billing like Colonial Pipeline, whatever the case may be, but it's really an IT incident by the classic definition, even though it had the same cyber physical impact of shutting down production. So in that case, does that make it into Strive?
If it shuts down the manufacturing process. Now, if it shuts down the IT process and manufacturing is still running along, then no, it doesn't.
Well, no. How about if they make a decision to shut down production?
It's
a gray area, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a very gray area. Colonial Pipeline, for instance, that was a classic case. That was OT hurt by it? Well, technically, no. But yes, it was because they had to shut down. But it was a purely an IT incident. So that we take that in terms of for our database and our threat report, we take that on a case by case basis because sometimes for instance, Colonial, that caused a panic on the Eastern Seaboard for what 3 or 4 days. I was caught in. I'm sure you were
too.
So that was a classic case of the OT incident causing causing an OT incident.
But it is definitely an example, I think, Greg, of the impact is the same, right? But I would also argue now that hackers, it's about the mission, right? And what is the mission they're trying to accomplish? And that's to get paid, right? It's financial gains from a ransomware perspective. And I think hackers inherently they're coders. And having been an ex-coder myself, you're inherently lazy. And if I can accomplish my goal or my mission without going any further, I'm not going to. Why would I? So if I can accomplish the mission by attacking the easier to get to IT systems, why are they easier? Because everything is connected, right? So if I've conducted my research and I can impact those IT systems and have the same impact of forcing that company to shut down operations, the impact is the same. You're not able to produce your goods and transport those goods to a point of sale and sell those goods. So I have impacted that.
Well, the best thing that ever happened for hackers was digitalization, because that means the amount of connectivity coming into the OT side is just astronomical compared to what it was. So, yes, it's great for companies. It's great for them to become more productive and a lot better. But if I'm a hacker, I find, as you say, the easiest way to get in, and then it's once you're in, and then you can kind of worm your way around and pivot here, pivot there. Then all of a sudden, bam, you can threaten to shut down operations. You can threaten to take over, the enterprise. I mean, it's whatever it is. So I think that has been, the IT side has been, yes, they have great security. They've been doing it for a long time, but it's just, it can be a killer on the OT side.
Yeah, I think so. But it's let's talk about some of those threat vectors, right? Because I think the most common threat vector is that IT to OT, and it's because it's the highway, it's the road, right?
Sure.
It's the interconnectivity. In case we have some listeners that aren't familiar with the OT or the operational systems or the shop floor, typically what we have is the industrial DMZ that separates the carpet from the concrete. And this is where we have the shared systems that are, supplying the IT side with the information that it needs in terms of telemetry and metrics, and the shop floor with what it needs from recipe information and maintenance and things of that nature. Anyway, that's the most common threat vector. But there's also something that I think we need to all be cognizant of how work gets done in our space. And it's all through solution partners and integrators. So, for example, when there's a planned shutdown at a manufacturer, that's where that parking lot is full with all the different army of contractors coming in, and they're trying to get all this work done in a week or 2 week window. The point being, that's another threat vector that we have to really be cognizant of, is the different contractors that are coming in doing work. Are they bringing in their laptops, their machines? Are they connecting into our process control networks, our control system networks? What controls do we have? Do we have controls to prevent that, forcing them to utilize specific engineering stations? What about medium? USB drives to bring in project files. Or I think these are some of the ancillary aspects. And then it's a 3-dimensional threat now as well with the shop floor wireless. And so I think these are more uncommon characteristics, but those are the edge can still be attacked locally, even though the main highway probably represents the much greater, higher percentage.
I agree. I've heard stories, Roger, that where essentially the contractors are coming in and they're setting up their own networks within the operation, and they're all wireless. They're all remote connectivity, and so they can take care of whatever it is they're supposed to be taking care of remotely, so they don't have to keep coming in and out of the plant or the facility. But the manufacturer doesn't even know about it.
Yeah.
So there's this rogue network that's out there, and it happened. I've heard it more than once, so I got to assume it happens quite frequently. That if anybody can get into that, that's just a walk through into the network, and so that's an easy attack vector if you know what you're looking for.
Another example, when we for years now, when we would do assessments at the site level, one of the reasons we always do the walkthrough and we always request to actually look inside of every control cabinet after about 6 or 7 cabinets, generally that maintenance manager or whoever's giving us the tour, like, you want to open this cabinet too. Usually what'll happen, Greg, is that at some point along the way, we'll see something like a little links of spots.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, we forgot about that. We had to set up a temporary access point just so we could actually access some data. It was just easier. We forgot about that. But it's not just the short circuiting of process to accomplish the motivation was it was non-malicious, right?
Yeah.
It was a short circuiting a process in order to do their job, right? But there's another aspect, and that's the suppliers, right? I think we have to look at the automation vendors now, where there's more than a few vendors that will have a little DIN rail mounted device that is actually a GPRS modem with different machine level connectivity. Because I think for many years now, the automation vendors have looked at this market, and their market ended when that PLC or that IO module was purchased. And everyone else was getting a larger slice of the pie with the project work and integration and everything else. So how do you make it more sticky? And how do you make it more sticky beyond that part number of that device is maintaining connectivity and realizing additional value added services, predictive analytics, things of that nature, right? In order to do that, you had to have some type of connectivity that could allow you to provide that value from a machine analytics perspective.
Sure.
That's another threat vector, right? So, yeah, you mentioned, the digital connectivity and, Industry 4.0 and 5.0 now. All of these things are really ultimately different layers of connectivity, but also threat vectors.
Well, exactly. Well, since I'm used to asking questions, let me ask you a question. Even though this is you're supposed to be asking the question.
Go for it, Bill.
We were talking offline before, and that was OT and IT security. And we both agree that the attacks are coming in mainly through IT. I mean, it's rare that you find an OT centric attack. So why is it that they're coming through IT versus OT? And is OT security that much better, or is it because, and we had talked about this before, is IT just more of a target?
I'll give you my personal opinion, which I believe to be correct. It's not that OT is better, but obviously not. It's more obscure still. It's definitely improved, but the IT represents the interstate highway system, right? There are roads connecting all the different factories, process facilities, and distribution centers. If you disconnect or you open up those bridges on those those roads, and there's not a path, yes, that would break the most common threat vector into the OT systems. So it's really a question of scale and opportunity. So if I'm a remote attacker and my motivation is financially motivated, then I'm going to utilize the existing road system and identify vulnerabilities that I can actually exploit to actually open up tunnels within those roads to get to the end result. Now, having said that, when I'm conducting my reconnaissance, it's actually, if they're really good at what they do, they'll know that they don't necessarily have to get to the OT side, right? Because that's what everyone in this community talks about. Well, what if we get in there and knock down that SCADA server, or we knock down some HMIs? Okay, we'll just restore it. We'll bring it back up. But if you can actually impact it, what concerns me the most is the non-ones and zeros crossing, the indirect, right? It's one thing to look at the IT connectivity to OT that's necessary from recipe systems and different telemetry and things of that nature. But what about the systems that we don't necessarily consider? That is the supplying of all the supporting systems, supplying raw materials for what we're producing, right? Billing. What about distribution of if we have temporary capacity for our products we're producing for storage, but we have no way to move that product, that buffer is only so large before we would have to shut down production. There's no place to put product, right? So these are the things that actually concern me. So if you take away the highway system, which is coming through IT, what you are limited to is coming through edges. You're having to go through partner networks, solution partners, integrators, other vendors, right? Or the actual edges themselves. That doesn't scale. So it makes so much more sense to go through IT. But if you're really doing your analysis, and this is what I really maintain when you kind of think about the dark web now with ransomware as a service, I think when you look at a global 500 manufacturer and you have information about the revenue of that company, one thing that you can do is simply look at public available information through financial reports and their own websites and things of this nature. You understand how many manufacturing sites they have globally, how many distribution centers, right? What's their footprint? Well, you can do some simple calculations of what is the revenue per site, manufacturing site. So now you can mathematically at least guesstimate of what is that factory producing on a daily basis. Now, if I could achieve shutting down 5% of the factories, I know what that financial impact is. Now, I could probably factor in some additional brand reputational and I think other costs on top of that. But I also, that helps me as an adversary to understand what is the likelihood of payment and how much ransom could I get? So it's targeted account selling, but it's targeted account ransomware.
Well, the ransomware organizations, or I'll just say the bad guys out there, that's a company within itself. It's a corporation. So they know exactly what they're doing and they know who to go after. Years ago, I was talking to somebody and we're talking about attacks and they were saying things like, what happens right now is there's an attack and they're throwing something up against the wall and see what sticks. So they could be hitting a manufacturer, they could be hitting a bank, they could be hitting, whatever. Any kind of organization. And he said what scares him the most at that point was when the bad guys start to get more manufacturing or OT knowledge. Well, I think we're at that point where people are getting more knowledge about what a manufacturer is going through. So a ransomware attack that's focused on OT, they don't have to go after the OT side of things as to what you're saying. They can go after
100%.
A side light or side Toyota, for instance. They were shut down, what was that, a year or two ago? Because one of their suppliers, they're just-in-time manufacturing. One of their suppliers was hit, shut them down. Toyota couldn't put cars together. So what happens? They have to shut down, and that's what happens. So as more and more people are getting that OT knowledge, that's where the protecting, like where you say that edge between IT and OT, that's where it becomes so important. And I don't know if are people paying attention to that these days or not. And I wish I had an answer to that.
I think that's a great example, Greg, of Toyota, of that indirect risk, and that's what concerns me the most for manufacturing, quite frankly. And I think specifically when you look at just-in-time manufacturing, that's a great example of, and for those of you listening that might not know how this works. When you look at a big automotive manufacturer, and let's take Spartanburg, right?
Yeah.
So big BMW plant there, right? What they do with the just-in-time manufacturing is all the suppliers actually build their facilities all around, right?
Yeah.
That plant. And when you have that zero inventory philosophical approach that really Toyota invented, what you have is just-in-time manufacturing where no one is they're just doing their production runs. They broadcast it out to all the suppliers, whether you're building seats or whatever the case may be, and they are supplying the number of units, the color of units, the shape of units, whatever's needed for that run. And if one of those vendors has an issue, there's some huge fines associated with that because of the daisy chain impact that can have, right?
Sure.
But I think that's, to your point, that is something that an adversary can actually impact a Toyota through a vendor, right? And that is a classic example of indirect. And that's something that we have to think about. It's the business impact analysis.
Well, exactly. And years ago, again, there was an Iowa food cooperative during harvest season. So they bring in all the, I forgot what it was corn or whatever it was, and they bring it all into this co-op. And all of a sudden they were, who would think that hackers would go after like a farm co-op? But they sure enough did, and they shut the place down. And this is stuff that is perishable. It's got a short life. Maybe it may not be as perishable as you think, but it's still, during harvest season, they got to move product.
Yeah.
They shut them down with a ransomware attack. And then, what happened? So that's the mindset behind this. So it's not only in cybersecurity, it's not only the technical component, which is huge. Of course, that's huge because you got to stay one step ahead, but it's also the business mindset. What part of the organization do we think is the most vulnerable that will hurt us if it's hit? And I think, I think we're getting to that point, but I don't know if we're all quite there yet. They always talk about the crown jewels, but the crown jewels often are thought of as on the manufacturing side, what do you need to keep up and running? But let's take it to another level, and what part of the organization needs to stay up and running so everything else can stay up and running.
I completely agree. And the one thing that really occurs to me, and like I said, you and I have been around this long enough where we know when this community was really just a handful of people, really.
Yeah.
And it's great to see the community grow the way it has. And I think there's definitely been advancements in skills and methodologies and things of that nature. I would say now you have a lot of people that are really doing some great work at doing like PHA cyber HAZOP type assessments.
Sure.
The IEC 62443-3-2. The point there I would make, though, is what the community is doing really well is looking at that industrial DMZ and South. What they're stating is anything on the other side of that IDMZ, that's out of scope, right? So that's reality, right? Now you have a building control system community that is really kind of starting to emerge a little bit, and they're thinking more facilities, right? The interconnected subdomains, a lot of them running on that NAGR framework, and your people movers, your lighting control, your HVAC, and a lot of your VoIP and cameras and physical security and things of that nature. So they're kind of the edges. Then you have IT thinking about the infrastructure. Now imagine those three worlds that I just described being overlapping Venn diagrams. My concern is that intersect, that no one's really looking at that intersect there because they're all operating in their silos. And this has kind of been my mission, if you will, is just really focusing on tearing down these silos. Because I think the past world we had of IT versus OT, that's in the past.
Oh yeah, without a
It's
doubt.
just a mission.
Well, I'll add another silo in there, and that's physical security.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
the we really launched into like a physical security component about 2 or 3 years ago, or actually maybe longer than that, where the physical security side is becoming more Ethernet controlled. So even like a lock on a door, the CCTV that's overseeing the whole environment, the fencing, it just all of that was you talk about low hanging fruit. That was low hanging fruit, and I probably still is. But they're all connected. It's kind of like you get into that, you can get into the building automation side, and then you can. The word pivot is like one of my favorite things to say because then you can really move around. And if
So
that's the case, all bets are off.
that actually reinforces my point. And I'm glad you brought that up. Let's take that physical security. Often,
Mhm.
what you have is you have a contracted party that is providing the physical security, and they're the ones that are monitoring what used to be CCTV, but it's more
Yeah,
IP-based camera systems now, right?
yeah, yeah.
But they're monitoring these systems and probably some offsite operation center, right?
Sure.
Which is different from the enterprise security operation center.
Hmm.
And let's just go out on a limb and assume that that global 500 manufacturer that has that security operation center for the enterprise also has some subset of OT. More than likely, they're kind of using another third party for some of that. The point being is this is where I realized no matter how tightly you try to integrate cybersecurity into your OT systems, it's always a bolt on. And here's what I mean by that. Having been on the SCADA design in architecture for just a lifetime, if you will, the alarm management philosophy of a SCADA system and all of the process alarms and that also get fed into the historian. The one thing that's really interesting to me is there's a lot of really interesting statistics and analytics now with SCADA alarms where you're looking at alarm hit list and you can actually look at, hey, you know what? We've had this one temperature sensor fail 95% more than any other temperature sensor across our fleet. There's been a change. It's time to look for a new temperature sensor, right? So we're doing some analytics there. The point being, I haven't seen anyone merge the data of the alarm management philosophy, which is the cyber physical events, your process events, with the security operations center that might include some of the log file analysis and network based and
Hmm.
correlate that. Let alone there's that third element, physical security. No one is actually monitoring the physical breaches and what we're seeing from the physical controls.
Hmm.
That's what I mean. It's separate worlds instead of a fusion of this information.
Exactly. And it's
That's the
it's
real
funny.
problem.
Well, and we talk about security, and the beauty of cybersecurity is the word change. It's a lot of change. It's always things changing, changing, changing. But to what you're saying, there's no real change of the dynamic behind how you are observing the cybersecurity perimeter or the cybersecurity environment. And so, you're focused on the IT side of cybersecurity. That's all you're really looking at. So you're not looking at process dynamics, the changing.
Innovations are happening within domains
Yeah,
or budgets.
yeah.
It's not the fusion between them.
Hmm. And
Yeah,
I find that really interesting, and
yeah.
and I think it's evolving, but is it
Is it?
evolving quick enough to where
Is it though?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
I don't see the evidence of it evolving. I know it should be,
yeah.
but I don't see the evidence.
Well, maybe I don't know. I mean, I know people talk about it, so I guess the talk is part of the evolution. But does it?
Yeah.
How is it? How much is it changing? I don't know. I don't know. But to what you were saying earlier, the awareness level everything started off with the awareness, and now it's moving past all of that awareness and the FUD factor and all that kind of stuff, and we're actually be able to sit down and talk with people and have a clear and cogent discussion about cybersecurity, but it's not all that fear mongering. So maybe that's evolving.
So I think there's a potential, and it might be heading the right direction now. Without mentioning some vendor names, there's some concepts out there on the enterprise SOC side of really driving towards infrastructure as code, and I love this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Detection as code and infrastructure as code, right? When you combine that capability with this idea within your enterprise SOC, and I'm a big believer in this, by the way, of having your OT SOC be a subset of your enterprise SOC. Smaller
Mm-hmm.
team. First of all, it allows you to extend the lifeline of your resources, your tier 1 and 2 analysts, right? Because these people typically are driven by something different. It's not just financially motivated. They have to be interested. So you can extend that life cycle of going from tier 1 to tier 2 on the enterprise, and then route into the OT side, tier 1, tier 2, right? So you can literally double the life expectancy there. And you're also facilitating that knowledge transfer within your organization. But now what you can do is, by doing this approach, you can combine two of those silos that are broken up right now.
Mm-hmm.
The third one is starting to integrate the telemetry from the physical security,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now what you can do is you can start addressing this as the infrastructure as code. And it's all about the processes, right? The data integration, the fusion, that's a solvable problem. What we really have to focus on is the process side within the SOC.
Well, I mean, but in following what you're saying, doesn't that kind of create another silo within the silo? Because you're kind of having your own minor.
Right?
I'm sorry?
It's the fusion center for all the silos, if you will, right?
Yeah.
That's the key point, Greg, because today, what you really have in most organizations is the enterprise SOC is just that. It really emerged historically from the network operations center. But that's your enterprise SOC. If there's any OT at all, they're probably looking at a third-party firm, and
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, I think that is a terrible mistake for most organizations, because if you think about architecturally speaking, like we're talking about, where are the OT sensors that are detecting the threats? They're south of that industrial DMZ, right? So your earliest point of detection is already having the adversary on the networks. Ooh, that's a little bit too late, right? So
yeah,
one of the greatest arguments for having that merged infrastructure is to have your early warning indicators earlier. If 90% of our threats are coming from IT to OT, wouldn't I want my OT sensors and to have the shared intelligence from the IT? So I'm getting the early warning. And wouldn't it make a lot more sense to have my teams in the same physical room communicating and collaborating?
Well, that's the key thing, is the communicating part, because, and you know better than I do that 95% of the issues, and it could be less more, but is all about communication. And it's if you don't know if one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, then it's a waste of time. And
that's the challenge with the MSSP approach, Greg, honestly, because you have separate SLAs, service level agreements for your different vendors and providers, but there's nothing within the service level agreement that requires the information sharing between them. Sometimes what you'll have is voluntary, but it's just not a cohesive fusion-based approach, and that's one of the challenges.
I agree with that, but that's got to be part of the agreement. Is you have to be able to communicate, and or else, it's, as you
I
say,
haven't
it's,
seen one though.
well,
That's why I say that, maybe it exists. Maybe there's some organizations that I haven't talked to yet. And I hope that's the case. Hopefully I'm not being pessimistic, but that's how I think we can actually move this world forward is to have that integration. And it's like what you and I were talking about, the people, process, and technology side. It's really focusing a lot more on the process, and the process is how do we do things in a repeatable fashion.
yeah. Well, the process got to be there. I mean, people have to, it's just got to be there, but the people part of it's got to be there too. So you have, and technology to me is, and we were talking about this before, but technology it's kind of, to me, it seems to be taking over. And I say that because technology was becoming greater and greater and greater and more intelligent and all of that, but you're still going to need the people and you need to know how to use it. So it's got to be a process to go along with it. But I mean, do you see the technology just skyrocketing?
We're at an inflection point I have never seen before in my entire career. I think there's a three-legged stool right now of technology that really concerns me, and that's AI in general, robotics, and quantum. Look at just one leg and look at AI. How far generative AI has come in the last year and a half. It's insane. Now, for those of us that have been using for a year and a half, it's really wild to see the journey, to see that. For those that just recently started using generative AI, you might have some blinders on of some of the negative aspects and the hallucinations and things that can occur. But the reality is the massive amount of information that is literally at your disposal with generative AI makes it a powerful, powerful tool to utilize. Even when you think about it from the coding perspective, one of the more interesting quotes that I've heard from one of the AI coding vendors was, AI is like coding is like having an absolute brilliant coder who is extremely fast, but is extremely forgetful. And that's the challenge right now, is we're not really at a repetitive state. And that's the real risk. But leveraging this, you can do so much more with less. But
and that was a big thing way back when, was, with a lot of the people exiting stage left, retiring, getting older, and you're not getting enough new people coming in. How are you going to be able to pick up and maintain that knowledge base? Well, this is how, through Gen AI and the whole deal. But that's the good side. The bad side is, bad guys can use it to their advantage. And, that's brutal. I heard about one attack, and I think somebody was talking about it. I may not get the facts right, but somebody was talking about it at a show, and maybe in the Net Zero show, where or Level Zero show, and there was one company that was attacked, and it was an AI driven attack where he was actually on a Zoom call with people, and then that Zoom call buttressed in his mind that he can start sending money over to this organization. None of the people on the Zoom call were real. It was all Gen I or AI generated kind of thing. So it could have been like you and me and the real person. And then he saw that it looked legit, started sending money over to this organization. They're out, I don't know how many millions of dollars and that kind of thing. But that's what it's all about. And, so, it's like the old game show, who do you trust? And that's kind of how we're heading down that track.
It's amazing. I think there's some areas where we can really leverage AI to our benefit, but there's other areas where we have to be extremely careful. Greg, I tell you what, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think we could keep going all day. I think we have in the past.
Yes,
But
we have. Yes, we have.
hey, I'm really glad that you could join us today, Greg. Fascinating conversation. And
Well, I'm
for
glad you
joining me.
had me. It was a lot of fun, and it's always great talking to you. But it's
Likewise.
I'm glad you had me on.